Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Living the Gospel of Life. I'm your host, Leticia Velasquez. Let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Mary, bright dawn of the new world, Mother of the living, to you do we entrust the cause of life. Look down, O Mother, upon the vast numbers of babies not allowed to be born, of the poor whose lives are made difficult, of men and women who are victims of brutal violence, of the elderly and sick killed by indifference or out of misguided mercy. Grant that all who believe in your Son may proclaim the gospel of life with honesty and love to the people of our time. Obtain for them the grace to accept that gospel as a gift ever new, the joy of celebrating it with gratitude throughout their lives, and the courage to bear witness to it resolutely, in order to build, together with all people of goodwill, the civilization of truth and love, to the praise and glory of God, the Creator and Lover of life. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, today we're honored with two guests. We have Nancy Valko, who is a registered nurse, a legal nurse consultant, volunteer, and a National Catholic Register columnist and contributor. Eileen Haupt, who is my co-founder of Keeping Infants with Down Syndrome. She is the mom of a young lady, Sadie, with Down syndrome, and pro-life advocate and member of the board member of the Vermont Right to Life. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Hi, Leticia. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'd like to add that Eileen may not be able to be with us the whole hour, but we're grateful for the time. You want to do a quick commercial before you have to leave, Eileen, for kids?
Sure. KIDS stands for Keep Infants with Down Syndrome. And it's a group that Leticia and I formed about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago. We gather families and friends of people with Down syndrome and invite them to walk in the March for Life together. We have a banner and signs, and we meet at the National Right to Life office, their headquarters, which up until this year has been right in D.C., a few blocks away from the march. This year, they've recently moved across the river over into Alexandria. So we're going to meet there in the morning, a little earlier than we usually do, to give us time to hop on the metro and get to the march to hear the speeches. So we welcome anyone who, you don't have to have a family member with Down syndrome. It can be just a friend. We have a man that comes every year because his nephew has Down syndrome. And we have friends that, so we're all welcome. Anyone who has a heart for people, especially babies with Down syndrome in utero, to walk with us. And so it's a presence at the march to represent that vulnerable population. And they can contact
Wonderful. And how
would
someone interested in marching get in touch with you?
Yeah, I guess the best way, if you're on Facebook, is to search for Keep Infants with Down Syndrome, or we have a blog on Keep Infants with Down Syndrome. You can our contact information should be on the blog, and that would be the best way to reach us through either.
Thank you, Eileen. I just want to make sure you got in there. Today's theme was inspired by actually a post Nancy wrote in her blog, but based on an article written by William McGurn, called Down Syndrome and the Gift of Innocence. I'm going to read it. It's a short piece. Comes with a lovely video. Even if you don't subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, which I don't, you have access to a lovely short video on this convent in France called Little Sisters, Disciples of the Lamb, where 10 Catholic religious sisters live in the French countryside. 8 of the 10, I believe, have Down syndrome. 8 of the 10 sisters, okay? And he describes the convent here. But the short video is just a beautiful visual with a soundtrack. Just very inspiring. So here he writes, Down syndrome and the gift of innocence. Innocence isn't much prized these days, yet at Christmas it's impossible to escape. The splendor of the music, the warm visions of hearth and home, the whole wonder of the season, all rest on the joy brought a weary world by innocence made incarnate. Even those of us who lost our innocence long ago sometimes look back wistfully on Christmases past, when as children we believed not only in Santa, but in a loving world that went with him, safe, caring, kind. For most of us, this never rises above sentiment or nostalgia. But what does someone do decided innocence was worth holding on to and built a whole way of life around it. It might look like the lives led by a small group of contemplative nuns in the French countryside just outside Le Blanc. These are the Little Sisters, disciples of the Lamb, and among religious orders they enjoy a singular distinction. They exist so that, quote, those who are the last place in the world, unquote, women with Down syndrome, can, quote, hold in the church the exceptional role of spouses of Christ, unquote. In practice, this means that able-bodied sisters devote their lives to ensuring their fellow sisters with Down syndrome can live their vocations. Living with Down syndrome is not all sweetness and light, even among nuns. The difference is that these women take this innocence, leaven the difficult and imperfect parts with love, and gift it back to the world in more sublime form through both prayer and example. The order was founded in 1985 with a community of two, Mother Line, now prioress, and Sister Veronique, who felt a vocation but could not find an order to accept her because she has Down syndrome. Today there are 10 sisters, 8 with Down syndrome. Quote, the smiling faces of our sisters with Down syndrome are a great message of hope for many injured families, unquote, Mother Line tells me. Quote, our smallest will also say that we are made for very great things, to love and be loved, unquote. She particularly asked for prayers that able-bodied young American girls, might consider life among her flock. A Christmas confession. I'm a sucker for those Facebook videos showing some basketball team letting the boy with Down syndrome shoot until he sinks a basket, or photos of a high school senior with Down syndrome because her classmates have elected her prom queen. Even the most jaded, maybe especially the most jaded, recognizes and perhaps even envies the special joy reserved for the pure of heart. Then you pull back and look at the faces of those cheering the things on, the fans at the basketball game, the other couples at the prom. Is their happiness any less? Not to mention the inner rejoicing of a tired mom who has just watched a crowd of people look at her child and see what she sees, a beautiful and unique human being who is a source of light. This is the everyday witness of the Little Sisters, disciples of the Lamb. In the world outside their walls, innocence can be dismissed as childish ignorance or dangerous naivete. Inside, the nuns choose to cherish and exalt in innocence, the unconditional love and trust that comes with it, an example of how we are meant to live with one another. In Morris West's novel, The Clowns of Christ, Christ returns to earth, but people have trouble recognizing him. At one point, he goes to a school for children with Down syndrome and picks up a little girl. Quote, I know what you're thinking, he says. You need a sign. What better one could I give but to make this little one whole and new? I could do it, but I will not. I gave this mite a gift I denied all of you, eternal innocence. To you she looks imperfect, but to me she's flawless. He goes on, she is necessary to you. She will evoke the kindness that will keep you human. Her infirmity will prompt you to gratitude for your own good fortune. This little one is my sign to you. Treasure her. So it is in Le Blanc. Hours after these words appear, the Little Sisters, disciples of the Lamb, will welcome the birth of the Savior. Whether there may be in the way of presents will be modest and mostly homemade. But for those hoping for a glimmer of life that burst into the skies over Bethlehem that first Christmas, nowhere will it shine more brilliantly than in this nondescript little convent in the center of France. Merry Christmas, sister. Oh, I could hardly get through that. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
Beautiful.
And I invited you ladies today because you've all shared on my show before what a gift your daughter with Down syndrome has been to you. Nancy, would you like to start sharing about your daughter?
My daughter changed my life, but ironically, my husband, who was a doctor, and I were pregnant with our third child when the Baby Doe incident happened in Indiana in 1982, and that was where a little boy who was born with Down syndrome and a small hole between his food pipe and his windpipe, easily correctable, always correctable at birth, and the parents, on the advice of the pediatrician, decided not to allow the surgery. The obstetrician told them this child will just be a blob. So the parents went to court. The pediatricians were outraged, and they went to court, and it got appealed and appealed. And my husband and I were looking at this, and he said, this is insane. He said, let's adopt the baby. Well, I was pregnant with my third, but I said, yeah, sure, if it saved the baby's life. And what happened, though, is unfortunately lawyers were actually flying to the U.S. Supreme Court to plead his case when the little boy died of starvation and dehydration. It was horrible. We were so upset about that. And then a few months later, my daughter Karen was born. And I was told shortly after she was born, as they said, she has Down syndrome. And as a nurse, my first question was, how was her heart? And they said, well, we've called in a cardiologist. And it was such a shock. And the cardiologist came in, and I said, give it to me straight. And he said, your daughter has an inoperable heart defect. Take her home. She will die in 2 weeks to 2 months. And I was just blown away. I was still in the recovery room after a C-section. And I said, give me an ashtray, some cigarettes, and a telephone. I said, I'm going to find out stuff, which they did. And one of the thoughts I had is, I don't know who this guy is, this cardiologist, and I'm going to find out. I want a second opinion. I'm a nurse. I know better. And this was the day before the Internet, and I found out where the Down syndrome people were. A friend of mine got me in touch with them. She got their number, and I was on the phone and taking care of the baby, and just determined to save her, and found out the best research was being done in Maryland at Silver Springs. So I wrote to them, and they sent me stuff back. And by the time I went in to see the cardiologist 3 weeks after she was born, I was pretty up on everything.
Good
and
for you.
He says, wait a second, she looks pretty good. Let me do some more testing. He came back and he says, hey, it turns out it's not that bad. She has an 80 to 90% with open heart surgery. And they said, just one. You can have it here in St. Louis. They said, but I'll support you either way. And that's when I exploded. I said, either way from what? He said, well, you decide not to do the surgery. And I blew him away. I told him, I said, you cannot touch my daughter if you have a problem with Down syndrome. My daughter must be treated like any other child with exactly the same heart defect. Otherwise,
good
it's
for
medical.
you. Nancy, let me ask you something. At one point, these heart surgeries were available, but they weren't being given to children with Downs. Am I right? It wasn't around the 80s that they sort of made it.
Well, they were there. I was shocked, and luckily we were medical people, and I was shocked at the attitude because we knew about Baby Doe, and that was not going to happen. And with my daughter, she had to be hospitalized for cardiac casts and different things, and I found horrible attitudes among some of the people who came in. One thing I did is I'd grill them on how much they knew about Down syndrome. And unfortunately, at one point, she was home. She got pneumonia and had to be hospitalized, and I was tipped off by the hospital. I got a phone call, and they said, the pediatrician has made your daughter a do not resuscitate.
Without your knowledge, wow.
And exactly what I told her. No, I said, no decisions are to be made without me. No DNR, I don't want any of that crap. And she did. I was absolutely shocked. I said, well, how could she do that? She knows me. And she said she felt you were, quote, too emotionally involved with that retarded baby, unquote.
Well,
so
you didn't want that one in charge. Wow.
Well, and this is 1982. I was shocked. So anyway, we got that reversed, and then she had another problem and became critically ill. The pneumonia went too far, and she was down in intensive care. And at one point, a young resident came in, and he said, why don't we just get this over with? I'll just pull everything. I said, you pull everything, I'll sue you. And I went to the chairman. And I went to the chairman of cardiology, and I told him what happened. He says, I'll fire the little, he used a word, because I knew him real well. And I said, well, try to educate him first, but if you can't, get rid of him, because parents do not need a doctor like that. I don't care how technically good they are. And eventually, unfortunately, we did lose our daughter, but everything was done. And when it was appropriate, I made her a do not resuscitate. Killed me to do it, but I knew, So, but what it turned out is it really made an impression. After Karen died, we were the biggest medical center in St. Louis. And after she died, the chairman of cardiology started the first Down syndrome clinic for children with Down syndrome, any medical needs they might have. And I was so pleased. And when my daughter died, I asked for donations to the Down Syndrome Association, which I was associated with, doing all sorts of stuff. And they used the money to start the first program for parents to teach them how to do an individual education program called an IEP. And they did that, and now it's a whole-day program, and things are going well. But we still find problems happening with children who have disabilities. And most recently, I was working with Cheryl Crozier, who had a child born with trisomy 18. That's not Down syndrome. It's different.
No. Down syndrome is trisomy 21, so that's a third copy of the 18th chromosome, and if I'm not mistaken, the lower the number of the chromosome, the more serious the trisomy is.
Well, it's a tough one. There's trisomy 13, all sorts of things. And she wanted, her little boy had a heart defect, and they wanted to do it, and they were at a Catholic hospital. This killed me. They were at a Catholic hospital, and they were supposed to be meeting with the cardiologist in a couple of days, and all of a sudden their son started going into distress, and they were begging somebody to do something. What are you going to do? His oxygen's dropping. And they didn't do anything, and he died in their arms. And it wasn't until afterwards they found out there was a secret medical futility policy at that Catholic hospital. So instead of suing, they decided there ought to be a law, and there is. It took us 5 years, but we got Simon's Law. His name was Simon. We got Simon's Law passed in Missouri. We had to fight hard for it because the head of the committee kept saying, oh, doctors wouldn't do that. I said, hey, it happened to my daughter too. I'm testifying. This is a problem. I'm still active with the disability community. It happens. It took us 5 years. We now have a couple more states that have Simon's Law. And I just read recently there is now national legislation to prevent this from happening. It hasn't even got the text yet.
Wait, prevent what from happening, Nancy? Be specific.
Pediatric medical futility, secret medical futility things. But we found out.
In other words, without the parent's knowledge.
Yes.
That they sign a DNR for the child without the parent?
I've been fighting medical futility for a long time. I was a trauma nurse, and I had patients that they wanted to give up on. They thought they were vegetables and stuff like that. And I brought some of them back and changed an entire unit because I refused.
So all of this is the legacy of your daughter's life.
This is all my daughter. She just absolutely changed my life, and I became a warrior, worked with the Reagan administration on the baby doe rules. Reagan was upset about baby doe and came out with these baby doe rules. The pediatricians were fighting. I was very active in that. And unfortunately, it didn't quite go through. There was a lot of stuff going on there. So that has been a big problem. But the legacy of my daughter, there have been so many people that have benefited from her life, and even though I miss her terribly, she was only 5.5 months old. I know that she left a really good legacy, and I'm so proud of her. And my children love people with disabilities. I wound up babysitting kids with all sorts of disabilities, and I told my kids, I said, these are my friends. You don't have to play with them. They love them, love them. The ADHD kids, the active kids, they sometimes would play hide and seek and not come out, but they loved them. And one in particular was a 6-year-old boy with cerebral palsy who was nonverbal and spastic and in a wheelchair. And my kids got to know him and treated him just like anybody else. And when my daughter had her 6th birthday, she didn't want any boys at her birthday party, not even her brother. I said, well, you have to have your brother. She said, and I want Dougie. And the mother cried. So the first non-family birthday. And a little girl came up at the birthday party, and she goes, what's wrong with him? Why is he like that? And I said, why are you black? And she goes, I don't know. I said, God made us in all sorts of different flavors, and we're all good. She goes, okay, and walked back. It was wonderful.
You love the simplicity of the children. Eileen, how is your daughter Sadie been a gift to you?
Oh, wow. Well, Nancy, my heart breaks when I hear your story. You really did, like Leticia said earlier, you're a pioneer and paved the way, I think, for, mothers like Leticia and me. Sadie's just been nothing but a gift. It's really hard to describe in human words, really. I really just feel that God has blessed me with her, and we've been very fortunate that she doesn't have a lot of medical issues. She had a heart defect that we found out about the day after she was born, and she did go for surgery to have that corrected when she was at the tender age of 3.5 months. But she did fine, and she's been healthy ever since. I mean, this kid never gets sick, very rarely, and so so we haven't had to deal with a lot of those. And she's I homeschooled her for about 6 years, was it? When she was an elementary student, and she did well there. Right now, she's working in a transition to work program. She just turned 21, and she's doing fantastic there. It's held at a hospital, the regional hospital. So she's got 3 different jobs that she does, and it's all about learning skills and learning how to have a job and all that. And she's and most of the stuff, most of her character, her abilities, they're things that I could have never foreseen or predicted. She loves American history, and she just eats it up. And I could have never predicted. Nobody could have predicted that. That's one of the things that we've talked about, Leticia, is that the prenatal tests, they can't predict the abilities that your child's going to have, and the strengths and the gifts, as well as the challenges. It just can't be predicted, and we shouldn't try to do that. She changed me. She just through the way things happened. It was I could see the little breadcrumbs that God left for me to come back to the Catholic Church, and I got involved in the pro-life cause very early on. When I found out the high abortion rate of babies with Down syndrome, I just nearly fell off my chair. When I heard that, I had no idea, and so I had to ask questions. It just took me a while. I was personally pro-life, but I didn't know how I felt about laws and about whether women should be able to have them or not. And little by little, as I found out more about abortion, I came to the point where I can't be on the sidelines. I have to be part of the effort, to end this horrific practice that we have. So she's changed me in a lot of ways, which can't get into now, but she's just been a gift and a joy, and we love her, and she's just added lots of color, to our world, and it's definitely our family is much better off with her. So
that's a beautiful testimony. Thank you, Eileen, so much. I think the main issue with how a prenatal diagnosis is given, and Dr. Brian Scott Coe of Mass General Hospital, who also has a Down syndrome center, he goes around the world teaching doctors how to give the diagnosis. And I think the main problem is in our medical model, we tend to, and Mary and Nancy, you can confirm this, we tend to list, problems. Okay, this child might have a hole in her heart, or she might have problems with the bowels, or problems, blah, 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 blah. Mental retardation, but all these things, but they don't mention the good side. They don't mention the gift that these children are to us, mostly because society doesn't recognize that as a whole, and these particular doctors don't have that experience. That's why it's so important for mothers like us to get out and to share our stories. Thank God through social media has been such a gift to not only the pro-life movement, but to the Down syndrome advocates, that we can share these stories through the social media that don't reach the moms. Unfortunately, I wanted to share it with a mom who is very close to having an abortion because her child was diagnosed prenatally with Down syndrome. And Baby Center blocked me. I tried so hard to just comment like everybody else was about my experience and say, it turns your world upside down initially. It's scary. Like Nancy said, you had a terrible reaction to hearing your child has a heart defect. Of course you do. My daughter had a 2-millimeter hole in her heart. Fortunately, it cleared up. But, every child comes with issues and problems and challenges. The only difference with Down syndrome is you kind of know some of them up front. I mean, the probability. But, I've had other children with medical issues. They didn't warn me when I found out I was pregnant with them because they don't have 21st chromosome. So I didn't get the warning. And I think that's the disadvantage of the warning, is that it tends to scare mothers. and they feel like they're not up to the challenge. Like I said, it's a good thing I didn't know what my other two daughters were going to develop later in life. Every child comes with challenges. Every child changes your life, gives you challenges, but also brings this beauty into your life. What's beautiful about Mr. McGurn's article is that there's a place on earth where Down syndrome is cherished. I know it's cherished in my house and your houses, but it's just nice to know there's a convent where they're especially cherished, and they are seen as having a spiritual gift. I've always recognized that Christina, my 17-year-old with Down syndrome, very stubborn personality, but incredible spiritual gifts at the same time. She, I believe, has seen Christ with her eyes and has just talked with the Virgin Mary. I'm not sure she saw her. She didn't say. But it was an intense conversation when my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer and died 4 months later. It was Chrissy who went to prayer. I was busy losing my mind and blaming God and, running around like crazy figuring out medical treatments for somebody who couldn't be helped. It was my daughter who laid my mom's case at the foot of Our Lady's feet, which is exactly what I should have done. So that spiritual gift has really brought our family to center our hearts more on Christ and Our Lady because of her leadership, really. I mean, she doesn't know she's leading us, but she is, by example. And by that life in the moment, that joy. This past month, we've been playing a lot of Christmas carols, and every time the word Christmas carol or a little bit of music would come on the radio, we'd get this absolute delight. And honestly, I don't think it was just the gifts. I think it's the whole joy of the season that she was celebrating. And it just reminds us, how many gifts our Lord puts in our life that we're too busy to notice. And that's why I think these children, these young adults are gifts that unfortunately the world is too busy and too worried to recognize. I think we feel losing control, like Michelle Williams, who was just on the Golden Globes, saying how she couldn't have her career in Hollywood and her award if she had that baby. I believe she's pregnant at this time, but she was indicating the baby she had aborted. And I said, yeah, but you don't know what you missed by not having a child. Maybe you still would have had your career after all. Maybe things would have been a little different. But you don't know what you missed. And maybe she'll only realize when this child is born. And I hope that there's somebody who shows her how to get to Rachel's Vineyard if that becomes traumatic and she repents. Because what an example that would be to many women.
People have to get information. I wrote a whole pamphlet years ago. It's out of print now on prenatal testing, the truth about prenatal testing. But also, and I wrote about this too, is I had a woman I ran into, and I said, oh, congratulations, you're pregnant. And she says, don't congratulate me. I might not be pregnant. I'm waiting for the results. And I know your story, but if it's Downs, it's gone. And I was with a friend who's supposedly pro-choice, and she thought I'd explode. And I said, listen, it'll probably just fine. It's got a 97% chance. But I said, if the baby does have Down syndrome, please call me. I will be with you the whole way. My husband and I will adopt the baby, if that's better. But I said, I will be with you the entire time. And she walked away. I didn't go into my thing on Down syndrome. And about 6 weeks later, this woman comes running up with a little baby, and she goes, oh, hi, how are you? This is my new daughter. And I said, oh, she's just beautiful. And then the woman started to cry, and she said, I am so sorry what I said to you. She said, I don't think I could have done it. I said, but I hope you know I was entirely serious when I said I would be there every step of the way. And
God bless you, Nancy. That was the exact right thing to say to her. I will be with you. Because the lecture wasn't going to get through that fear she was experiencing. Was she 34 weeks pregnant at the time? She said.
Well, she was really pregnant.
Wow.
And my friend who was pro-choice, I keep calling her a closet pro-lifer because she said, well, I wouldn't want to have an abortion myself, but, and I said, you're a closet pro-lifer, why don't you want one? And she thought I'd explode, and she said, oh, my God, Nancy, how did you react like that? I thought you'd explode. And I said, no, this is a person in pain, and this is what we do in the pro-life community. I'm the spokesperson for the National Association of Pro-Life Nurses. And I said, that's the most important thing we can tell the people is, I am here for you.
Right. That's right.
That makes all the difference in the world, because I know I know it particularly well because with my daughter Karen, my family was not accepting on either side.
Yeah.
And when she died, I put the notice in the paper and to give donations to the Down Syndrome Association. I was criticized because then they'll know she has Downs. You don't need to say that.
That was the feeling in those days. It was a shame.
Yeah.
It was a shame to your family somehow that your child was not perfect. And we've managed to overcome that once the child is born. However, what bothers me is that when I try and reach out to expectant mothers, and we do have a first call program with the Connecticut Down Syndrome Conference, it's really hard to get access to them. And I mean voluntary access. I mean, just put your number on your doctor's Rolodex, remember that, but on his list of contacts, that if they want to a mother questions, here we are. That's all. And that was the thing that helped me the most. I had lots of wonderful Catholic homeschooling friends with many children, none of whom were all perfect, that were supportive, but no one who could answer the questions I had until my pastor put me in touch with the mom of a daughter with Down syndrome. That was what I really needed. But it's frustrating not to be able to reach out to these moms. That's why the Internet is such a blessing, because maybe we will cross paths in time.
Internet has really been. Now, I had one case where a pediatrician who retired and became a deacon in church in Florida called me, and he says, Nancy, can you help me? I've got this young couple. They're Japanese. They just found out their baby has Down syndrome, and they're pregnant. And I don't know what to do. I said, well, get them in touch with the Down Syndrome Association. I gave him a bunch of stuff. And he called me back, and he said, it's considered a real stigma in Japan. I said, really? And, yeah, a mark, really a bad thing. He said, could you talk to her? I said, sure. And so I talked to them, and every time I talked to this deacon, I said, if the baby has Down syndrome, he goes, Nancy, it's for sure. And I said, well, so anyway, I talked to them, and he said, oh, that helps so much. They're now all excited. Well, then he calls me back. They had the baby. The baby had no Down syndrome, and they were almost disappointed. They were so ready for it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'll talk to him again, But it was really interesting.
You have to console them now, right?
I said, well, good for you. And like I keep telling people, there is no guarantees on any child before or after birth.
That's right.
And as much as I love Karen, I had an older daughter. She was 3 when Karen was born, and she loved that baby so much. And when she died, my daughter was just very good. My husband had a nervous breakdown, abandoned the family, had 3 small children. I had a baby after Karen. And I was left with 3 kids, no support from the family, and it was really tough, and I had to put her in public school. And she wound up getting into drugs and wound up killing herself when she was 30 years old.
See, and that is such a great heartbreak. And you didn't know that when she was a precious little baby in your arms. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen.
I said, this child was great when she was 12. Everybody said, you have the perfect daughter. I said, I think she's a house of cards. I said, one thing goes wrong, I'm really worried. And got her all the treatment. We struggled for 16 years to do it, and we thought we had gotten her over the hump, and she did it. And it just almost destroyed the family.
Sorry.
And she used an assisted suicide technique. She had read a book by Derek Humphrey, who wrote Final Exit. And I was tipped off by one of the detectives who said, I don't understand. The medical examiner said her death was textbook Final Exit. And I said, oh, my God. She goes, what does that mean? I said, he wrote about what he called self-deliverance, how to kill off yourself. And she goes, oh, my God, when I got the autopsy result, that's exactly what she did.
I'm so sorry.
And this is, we have so many things after our kids, the Internet and the social media and everything else. It's really tough with any child, but every child is a gift. And like I said, both my girls were a gift.
That's right.
And when my daughter died, I had like a little vision of her sitting on Mary's lap with Karen in her arms, and they're all wrapped in a comforter.
Oh, beautiful.
That was wonderful. That really helped me. And I had named her after the Blessed Virgin. And the whole time she was struggling with drugs, I do the memorare and say, you are my co-mother. And but things happen. You don't turn away from God.
That's right. And someday we'll understand it all. One thing I wanted to discuss with you today is something I always say when I read articles about the Little Sisters, Disciples of the Land. Everybody tags me in every time there's an article, so I think I've read them all. And that wouldn't it be great if they opened up a convent here? Instead, I find they're looking for recruits from the United States. But, you know, a recruit from the United States could end up starting a convent here eventually. Not just so that if my daughter had a vocation that she could join the convent, which that would be the only chance, but also if they had, say, a residence attached where, you know, those of us who don't know what's going to happen to our children with Down syndrome when we pass away could do so in the knowledge that our children would be cherished and treated properly, and given all the medical care that they're due to. There was a sad story in the UK a year ago, Nancy, maybe you remember it, of a young man, not a young man, he was older, in a home, but he had Down syndrome, and he was allowed to starve in the hospital because there was no one to advocate for him.
Right.
Just was the most sweet man, and I couldn't get over it. It haunted me because there was no one that cared.
Leticia, this is just interesting how all this has come up this week, because this has just been on my heart about wishing, you know, that there was an order of nuns or an order of sisters that would take care of people with, you know, maybe special needs in general, but, you know, just of course, Down syndrome is what I'm interested in. You know, it doesn't matter to me whether it's all people with special needs or just people with Down syndrome, but I worry about, I really want, if something were to happen to us, to have her be with either a family or a home where they've got Catholic values. You know, just from my observation in dealing with the social services, you know, they tend to be people who Catholic values aren't what they're all about, and that's all we really when we enter the adult world and they have services, which my state, Vermont, has excellent services from what I can tell, from what we've experienced so far. But, you know, I am concerned about who's looking out for her innocence and her Catholic values. I had an experience where she was in a program last year, and I just came across some work that she was doing, and there was a poster of a different religion that she had made, and this was just a bag of things that she had, you know, made in this program, and I just happened to be looking through it, and I was very upset. You know, this is a girl who's Catholic, and she loves her Catholic faith, but she's vulnerable, you know, to other points of view, and so it's just been on my mind. And you know, you do start, you know, we're getting older, and you do think about where are they going to be. I don't have a lot of children, you know, that I could leave her in good hands that way. I have, you know, a daughter who has Catholic, you know, she's following her Catholic faith, but what if something were to happen to her? You know, so
I think that
anyway, so this has just really been on my heart, and what I've been hoping for is that there would be an order of nuns that would take this on as their charism. And then you posted an article about some nuns who were starting a home out in Wisconsin, which really just interested me, and just anyway, it's very timely.
Well, yes, it's not particularly for people with disabilities, but for the elderly. And I know the Little Sisters of the Poor do an amazing job. I've been able to visit their convent in Queens, New York. They do an amazing job, not necessarily with people with disabilities per se, but let's face it, when you are old and you need to be in a nursing home, you are disabled by definition, right? And they certainly have the Catholic values that we're looking for. But listen, I was blessed to have a meeting today with two of Christina's therapists, speech therapists and occupational therapists, both good Catholics, who said they want to win the lottery because that's exactly what they would do. You know, start a place. Care for these young, well, not so young people, and do therapy on them, and you know, all kinds of activities. So I said, I'm in. You know, okay, God, are you listening? All we need is the lottery, and we're going to set this up. So, and having some sisters would be wonderful that would join us, because the religious aspect is really important. Lay people do great things, and we can certainly do it. But that would be wonderful, a wonderful charism to have. I was just talking to my daughter, who's an RN, Gabriella, that it's sad because a lot of the things that were done by religious, like orphanages and hospitals and schools, got taken over by the state, and the orders would sign contracts with the state because they have a lot of money, and I understand, but then they lose the charism, they lose the Catholic values. So then, I was looking at a pregnant woman who was vulnerable to abortion, and I wanted to put her in a homeless shelter, and I know one run by very nice sisters, but I had to go through the state clearinghouse. So that meant that she wouldn't necessarily get a place that wouldn't encourage her to abort. So the same thing with our beautiful people, our daughters that we love. We want someone that's going to protect their faith, their innocence, purity. I hear is an issue in some of these group homes. There's no judgment made about people that live there, living a promiscuous life, even if they really don't have the ability to make an adult decision. That's the scary part, because that leads to abuse. Their purity should be protected, and it's not. And it's just scary, and I'm definitely at that point of view with you. And so we just have to combine our prayers and our resources and see what God has in mind in the future for our beautiful daughters that are such a gift to society. This wasn't a problem back in the old days, Nancy, because the surgeries weren't done in the 80s that they were life-saving, right? Like you had to talk the doctor into it.
Actually, with him, I had to. And the funny thing with him is just having taken care of Karen, he turned everything around and became the top cardiologist for the Down Syndrome Association.
I'm sure you had a lot to do with that. Do you realize that their life expectancy doubled in the 80s, the Down syndrome community, simply because doctors like your cardiologist decided that they were worth the surgery? I mean, that's just mind-blowing. In other words, it was there all along, but, they have Down syndrome. And Dr. William Mobley tells a story about being an intern, I believe he's at California Stanford, I believe, medical school. And a young woman with Down syndrome came in presenting classic signs of appendicitis. As she was going off shift, he made the diagnosis as an intern, came back 12 hours later, and there she was in utter agony. And when he questioned them, did I get the diagnosis wrong about appendicitis? It's an acute disorder. As you know, you have to operate right away. The patient will die. They said, no, you're right. She has appendicitis. So, well, she has Down syndrome, they said. And he was horrified, and that's how he got involved, helping children and doing research with Down syndrome, because it was just assumed that girl was going to die a painful, unnecessary death because she had an extra chromosome, and she was considered basically life unworthy of life, or certainly life unworthy of surgery. So that is changing somewhat, but not completely. There's
there. I worked with a really good geneticist, and he was wonderful, one of the few that I met, and I loved it when he called Down syndrome the Cadillac of birth defects. I said, okay, tell me what the Volkswagen is and the Rolls Royce. And he would laugh and say, you're terrible.
Why did he say that?
He just loved the kids with Down syndrome. He said, that's the Cadillac of birth defects.
Because
I thought it was funny. He would laugh, but get mad when I say, "Tell me what the Volkswagen is and the Rolls Royce birth defect." Because I've seen so many things. I've worked trauma, I've worked hospice, I've worked all these different things. Everybody is so unique, And like when I wrote the blog about Mr. McGurn's wonderful thing, I went, we've got to remember that, particularly with abortion, all children are born with the gift of innocence. None of them deserve to be gotten rid of. And they had the head of the ACLU disability, I quoted her in there, she wrote this terrible thing and said, oh, no, abortion for Down syndrome. She was defending it. She goes, well, there's a stigma and everything, but this doesn't do anything, forcing women to have abortions or have their babies doesn't do anything to improve their lives, and the families are all upset. I mean, I have written so much on this, the studies and everything else. I about blew a gasket. And I said, Down syndrome children are especially vulnerable because of prenatal testing now. But I said, all those kids have the gift of innocence. What is wrong with people? So I joined the pro-life movement because I loved the people with disabilities, but I moved on to pro-life because they were a little afraid to take a position when it came to prenatal testing and abortion, and I brought up a way of getting around that. I said we could say that abortion is unnecessary with the diagnosis of prenatally of Down syndrome because there's a waiting list of prospective adoptive parents who want these children with Down syndrome. And almost got it through, and it didn't get through. And I said, well, I've got to move on. But that's really true, is with all these kids, you know, spina bifida has a long waiting list of kids ready to take a spina bifida baby. It's out there. I gave a talk one time. I was asked to give one for a community college course for older people. And I talked about my daughter and everything. We were talking about abortion in general, and I knew most of the people probably there were pro-choice. And one guy, he says, who wants a defective baby? And I wrote a whole blog on that about what is defective, you know, and what is not. And because I said that needs to be addressed, you know. I love when McGurn said, quoted that Morris West thing, said, that little girl with Down syndrome, I didn't heal her because she was perfect the way she was.
Yeah, God doesn't make mistakes, and we may not always understand his ways, but everything he does is for our good. Now, does that mean it doesn't call us to grow and to become more patient and loving and kind? Well, hopefully so, because I could have I needed a lot of improvement in 2002, and I think my daughter's done a pretty good job, but I hope she sticks around for the rest of it, because I need a lot more work. And if only we saw our lives that way, as an offering to one another, instead of what I want to accomplish and how much money I want to make, as that, you know, Michelle Williams said. How sad. Because I've seen many a movie star that gets older than her, particularly a woman, and says, I wish I had spent more time with my family than my kids. And that is, unfortunately, a very common thing. And many times they say it when it's too late to have children. And my heart breaks for them.
Well, I was so pleased when both my daughters got pregnant, one, unfortunately, at 18, and unmarried, and both of them rejected any prenatal testing. They said, well, you know, you're at higher risk of having a baby with Downs because of your sister. And they all went, we'd love it. Maybe can have Downs. At all.
You raised them right, Nancy. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They did know that, and they all rejected it. And it was interesting when I did the pamphlet on prenatal testing. I did it because we had a friend, a doctor and his wife, and they had a baby who died shortly after birth or whatever. So the doctors, they said, well, we should do prenatal testing. So they did prenatal testing, and they lost the second baby. And she said, I guess I'm one of the statistics that babies lost because of amniocentesis. And they found out that she did not meet the criteria. The baby obviously, it died a short time after she had the amnio, but they said, no, you have to lose the baby within 2 or 3 days. And they were horrified. And I found out, I went around and I asked all around at different hospitals in the St. Louis area, and I said, what do you think constitutes a miscarriage caused by amniocentesis? Every one of them had a different set of guidelines. And I said, obviously, they don't know what the heck they're doing. So that was kind of interesting, so I wrote a pamphlet on that.
My daughter for laying all that groundwork for us. Oh my goodness, you made Eileen and my jobs our jobs easier. But I will say that the reason we formed Kids was that we were looking around for Down syndrome organizations that would respect the right to life of a young person, unborn person with Down syndrome born, and we couldn't find any. So that's why we formed Kids. We said somebody ought to do something, and then we realized that was God's way of calling us. So
I tried very hard, and I became very, very close to it. I was so excited because I did have a national president. He goes, well, that's a really good idea. And I was so pleased, and then at the end said, no, we're not going to do that. And I work a lot with the disability community, and they're kind of funny about that stuff. And I asked them, they said, we don't want to take a position on abortion. And I said, why? And they said, well, you know, we don't believe a child should be aborted because it has a disability. And I said, but it's okay to abort all the healthy kids you want? They go, I know. It doesn't make any sense, but this is where we're at. So I've worked within the disability community, and they know I'm pro-life, and I do say stuff they accept it, which they should.
Good, because you make sense. Our position is fair, it's just, and it's logical. But people who would advocate abortion are not.
And it's loving. That's what people don't understand.
Yes,
I said, I do this out of love, not out of saying, oh, you can't have an abortion or anything. I do the best I can with anyone who's considering it, anything I find out. And after a baby's born, I'm there for the family. And it's so darned important. And when people feel accepted and their children are accepted, I've seen families that have just blown me away with how wonderful they are. And I know when I joined the Down Syndrome Association, I met so many wonderful people. My family was horrible. And I asked them, I said, were you like this before your child was born? And every single one of them said, no, I was not. My child made me the way I am.
That's right.
Yes.
I thought that was beautiful.
Absolutely. So that's how we have to be there for those people until the families grow into loving that child. And it happens more often than not. Sometimes it doesn't happen. But
very, very rarely, I would say. The common thread with when you hear, when you read or you hear someone's testimony on how they learned about their baby having Down syndrome, whether in utero or when they were born, the common thread is sometimes they're devastated. Sometimes they are afraid, but almost all of them, very rarely do you hear one that regrets it, and they all say, my child has changed my life, they've changed me, I wouldn't change a thing. And if you could just hang in there and trust, the best way it's going to be, all three of us know that special love, that joy, that beauty that these children and adults grow into adults have, it's very special and it's very unique, and you have to experience it. You can't it's really hard to convey in words. You have to just hang on and trust. And
having that person who will walk with you, even just for a little while.
Trust is not very common in society now, but trust us. Trust our experience, and you can contact us. I want you to give your contact information, Nancy, so that people, if want to contact you and discuss their case, their child with that they're expecting with Down syndrome or newborn, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, they can get in touch with me by email. I have a blog. It's www. And then it's my name, Nancy Valko, Nancy, V as in Victor, ALKO.com. I also have an email address. It's Nancy Valko, one word, @gmail.com. But I said that was a big thing, is if they contact, and now with the Internet, it's so much easier, even with some of these rare occurrences. I've had kids where I've helped families where they never did quite know what was going on. The kid was just had some problems, and they couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. But I've seen adults, with brain injuries, and everybody goes, oh, no. In fact, my next blog will be on 2 stories of hope about medical futility, is people in a rural area and one in Africa where there was no real support, and these people found support, and they brought their loved ones back after a severe brain injury. It's wonderful.
Isn't that beautiful?
That's, we have to let people know that the help is out there, and that's what the pro-life movement is about. I tell people when I go out, and I do a lot of secular media, and I said, because one time I had the Ladies' Home Journal call, and they said, are you with that anti-abortion nurses group? And I said, no. And they go, what? And I said, no, we are a group of nurses that believe in excellence in health care, and that's why we are against things like abortion, infanticide, and euthanasia. And I thought that they said, oh, okay, and we went ahead, we had a nice time.
Good for you.
They called me back several times with a problem. My mother has this. Do you know somebody that's good? And they called me with their problems, which I thought was really unusual.
You became a counselor to them.
I said, we're not anti-abortion.
That's
we're
right.
pro-life, and we're pro-life, and that's why I go around. I speak against assisted suicide laws all around the United States. I write my blog on everything and anything that's pro-life.
Beautiful.
And some other things.
Amen, Nancy.
Yeah, tips on how to care for somebody in a nursing home, what to look out for. My mother had Down syndrome, she had Alzheimer's. That's like Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
They want to get rid of those people too.
Yeah, sure.
And terminal cancer, and I wrote a thing called 5 Tips on Dealing with People with Alzheimer's that I learned from my mother and my 2-year-old daughter. And it was so cute, and I'd had so many people say, just your few little tips just made all the difference in dealing with my relative. So I feel very blessed. When I was going through all of this, my husband had a breakdown and left the family and left us destitute, and my family, I was left alone with 3 small children and 1 in diapers. I went, oh, Lord, what am I going to do? And now that I'm older, I would be down like in the weeds going, God, which way should I turn? I'm having trouble finding a job. They're laying off nurses. It was terrible. And now that I'm older, I'm like up on the side of the mountaintop, and I look, and there's a very strange little path going all these different ways.
Uh-huh.
It was the tough things that led me to something else. Many times I didn't know which way to go. I go, God, tell me. And it was like, just pick. And I did, and it worked out. So that's the whole thing.
So we're here to help these people that are in those valleys when they have a child with disability that don't see the path. And we're here to hold on to you and accompany you. People can email me, Leticia Velasquez, at marysjoys@yahoo.com. That's MARYSJOYS at yahoo.com if we want to discuss their situation. I've counseled people through this as well. And I really thank you, ladies, Eileen Haupt of Keep Infants with Down Syndrome and Nancy Valko of nancyvalko.com for being my guest this afternoon. Eileen at the spur of the moment, and Nancy pretty much at the spur of the moment. It was yesterday. I knew I can count on you for some inspiring advice and wonderful, inspiring stories on the gift of innocence that all children have, but that our children with Down syndrome will carry in one way or another throughout their lives. Somehow society doesn't get into them and corrupt them the way it does with our other family members, and we cherish that. We cherish all human life from beginning to end. And I thank you so much. And thank you for being our listener for living the gospel of life.
Thank you, Leticia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.